famous philosopher Slavoj Žižek once said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. The levels of social trust and trust in economic political institutions are going to be disappearing over coming years unless we try and do something about it. Brazil is, as they always say, the lungs of the world. And we know the Amazon is, emitting more carbon than it draws down now since 2021. It's no longer the lungs of the earth. So when it comes to AI, I think the first important distinction to make is between what's sometimes called AGI, artificial general intelligence. So the idea of thinking machines, the machines that, like in the Terminator or the Matrix, which might kill human beings and turn us to dust and they're conscious. And then the other kind of AI is what's sometimes called narrow AI, which is the algorithms which try to sell us more stuff. The big data crunching, the Amazon algorithm that will suggest what the next book you should buy. I think the first kind, AGI, is a ghost story. I think this is a kind of distraction from the actual dangers of the more everyday AI, which already exists around us. And we're seeing, ChatGPT and a million other things. And I think the big danger with that kind of AI, a lot of people talk about the problems of AI ethics and so on. Yes, but to me the big problem has to do with the nature of information, as you ask, because if you think about the global financial system, the big threat there is financial collapse of a big superorganism. When it comes to the superorganism of AI, I think the big threat due to the spread, the exponential spread of fake information is not financial collapse, but reality collapse. The idea that we will not be able to trust basic information. Already, of course, we see this in politics, like in the recent US election, fake opinion polls saying that Trump was winning here and there, dozens and dozens of them. But what happens when we have systematic fake stock market reports, fake company investment profiles, like everything? The levels of social trust and trust in economic political institutions are going to be disappearing over coming years unless we try and do something about it. I'm not saying I have any great solution to that, but I think that reality collapse is kind of the thing that worries me most. Even though I know, of course, yes, AI can be used to help, create new kinds of bioweapons, and of course those are real problems, but I think the information one is fundamental.
Has society failed by not imagining a viable alternative to capitalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this has a lot to do with our failure of imagination. The famous philosopher Slavoj Žižek once said, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I think it's so hard to imagine something outside the water that we're swimming in. And one of the things I've done in my new book, History for Tomorrow, is look at different ways economies have functioned at different times in history that do not look like the kind of corporate neoliberal capitalism that we have today. So, for example, in Japan in the 18th century, in the city of Edo, today's Tokyo, over 1 million people were living there then. It was kind of their equivalent of the world's equivalent, 18th century equivalent of São Paulo, giant city. They had what we would today call a circular economy, where almost every resource was reused, or products were repaired, repurposed, recycled. So if you had a kimono, you might use it until the cloth began to wear out, and then you would turn it into pajamas, then you would cut it up into nappies and diapers to use with your child, and then you would turn it into cleaning cloths, and you'd finally burn the cotton for fuel. Because they had shortages of cotton because they weren't trading with the outside world. And this was just one example. Brazil's recently introduced its first circular economy strategy, I think in June 2024. I don't know whether it's going to be very effective or not, but we know that we can run our economies at large scale in this different kind of way. We've seen it in Japan or in Italy. Go to the Italian region of Emilia-Romagna. The capital is Bologna. 5 million people live there. 1/3 of the economy is cooperatives, cooperative businesses. Some of them are agricultural firms, some are AI firms, but they're owned by their workers. and they're still interested in markets. They're buying and selling, but it's not capitalism. It's markets without capitalism, I might say. And I think there's a really interesting growth area there. Think of a company like Patagonia, clothing company, which a couple of years ago changed its ownership structure to become a steward-owned firm where the voting shares are held in a public trust that has a legal obligation to care for planet Earth. So they now say that the Earth is our only shareholder. And more companies are being inventive, I think, in this way. And I think so we're shifting towards a post-growth, post-capitalist economies. And that's where I think we need to go, absolutely.
What do you feel about Brazil? How do you analyze our society as an Australian man?
So about 25 years ago, I used to teach Latin American politics in universities. I did my PhD thesis about Guatemalan business. I used to teach, and I did a master's in Latin American politics. And I have no great expertise in Brazil, but I used to have to read about Brazilian history and society. And I think what always struck me is the vibrancy of the social movements. I mean, think in 1984, the derechas já, 1 million people on the streets challenging the authoritarian regime. The Catholic Church, students, trade unions coming together. It's, other countries have examples like that, but when I think of Brazil, I think of the power of movements through its history and its relatively recent or modern history. And I see a lot of that in Brazil. Amongst all of these contradictions that you're talking about, the huge, wealth inequality, for example, or race issues and all these kinds of things. And again, I have no expertise, but Brazil is, as they always say, the lungs of the world. And we know the Amazon is, emitting more carbon than it draws down now since 2021. It's no longer the lungs of the earth. So Brazil is such an important place for the future of humanity in that sense. Not the only place, but of course the Amazon is one of the key kind of tipping point areas, for Earth system stability. And I think, of course, when I think about Brazil, it's that social movement, that history that I find most kind of striking and interesting. And of course, all the obvious stuff as well, like that intensity for living, that I feel.